Assalamu alaikum student, welcome to another lecture on TOEFL, and this time another method. Yes, another method, a very important method. And what do we call this method? Community language learning, right? And how do we abbreviate this method? CLL. All right, good. So how are you students? How was your last lecture? Did you enjoy that? I'm sure you must have enjoyed that lecture. Why? Because that lecture, that method particularly, in fact, everybody, of course, when we come to know about the method, when we see the techniques in the method, and we, of course, the principles and the classroom proceedings, yes, that method, of course, my dear the students, a majority of the teachers and the students, in fact, who have been through that the method, they say that this method is a real success. And this method, why is a real success? Because this method teaches the foreign language naturally, and there is no stress on the student, and there is no pressure on the student. So that's why the method is a real success. Clear? So today we have to start CLL, community language learning. Before we start, so as usual, the practice that we have, what is the practice, students? Yes, the practice have what? That we have to review what? The previous lecture. And I asked, of course, made a commitment last week that I would review some of the principles and I would answer those 10 questions before I start the next lecture. So that is what we call them TIQ, 10 important questions. Today I'll try to answer those the questions, and then we will move on. So what are those questions, students? What are the goals of the teacher using which method? Suggestopedia. Then role of the teacher, role of the student in that method. Then what else? Yes, student, yes, interaction between the students and also interaction between the teacher and the student. Then what else? Characteristics of the teaching learning, the process. Then what else, students? Yeah, how language is viewed, how culture is viewed, we have to see that. And then which areas of language are focused and which skills are focused through the method. Then what else, students? Of course, that how feelings of the students are dealt, and in fact how evaluation is done and how errors are dealt with. So let's start. The first one, the goals of the teacher, that of course the teachers who use Suggestopedia who for their teaching the process, teaching foreign language, why do they do so? What are the goals they want to achieve? So student, the goal of this Suggestopedia is, what's the goal? To increase the pace of learning. And how this pace can be increased? By what? De-suggesting. And what do we de-suggest, students? Yes, all the psychological barriers that the student might have. Clear? So this is the goal of this goal of the teachers who in fact use the method for teaching foreign language, because the teacher feel that, well, if the students in fact de-suggest their psychological barriers, so learning would be faster, learning would be better. So this is in fact the goal of the teacher, exploiting this method in the classes. Then the role of the teacher, again we have to see, and then role of the students. So role of the teacher in this class, my dear students, is the teacher is authority, right? Why teacher is authority? You can raise a question. It's a very valid question. Why? Because since the learning is fun learning, there are lots of activities going on in the class. There are dialogues, and there are, students have their identities, so they keep on interacting. There is more interpersonal communication. The teacher also interacts with the students. He talks to a group of students. He talks to everybody. He talks to individuals, and he also talks to the group of students. So since lots of activities are there in the class, there is what? Continuous communication going on. So at least the role of the teacher, deserves to have the power, because only then we can have a proper, of course, management of the class. Otherwise, there can be there can be chaos in the class, because if there is nobody who has the power, then student would be busy doing whatever they want to, in fact. So the role of the teacher is important in this method, so that all the activities that the teacher has planned for the class could be managed successfully. So that is what the teacher has authority, and again the teacher deserves respect, and the student also give him respect. Because of these activities, of course, if the students give respect to the teacher, only then, of course, that is the purpose of that method could be achieved. So that's why, of course, the role of the student is important in this method, and also the role of the teacher is important. The teacher role is authority, the power. He has the power. He can maneuver things. He can lead the students, and it is a very well justified role of the teacher for such a situation where they have to they have to guide people. They have to maintain discipline also, right? And see, they have to give chance to everybody, in fact, and for in simple words, for the success of all the activities, we could say that the role of a teacher is justified, that he deserves power. In fact, he deserves authority. Then the next, of course, the question is, what are the characteristics of teaching learning process in this method? So you have seen in the class proceeding, my dear students, that classroom is ideal, right? We saw the interior of the class, and we saw there are posters in the class, there are charts in the class, right? And the class is very well decorated with what? With meaningful material. In fact, there are charts with words, of course, vocabulary item. There are charts with grammatical structures are there. So there are charts with pictures. So there is a source of peripheral learning is there in this method. So we can say that the class is suitable, and even the sitting arrangement of the class again is ideal. Students are provided with good seats, and they can sit comfortably. And why it has been done? Because the comfort of the student definitely, in fact, helps them to learn language the faster. On the other hand, if they do not have this facility, so that the learning cannot be the faster. So we can say that this comfort level of the student definitely is one of the factors that enhance, of course, that enhances learning of the foreign language, and that also increases the pace of the learning of the foreign language. So again, we see there is peripheral learning. So very simple concept. The peripheral learning is that the learning from the walls of the classroom. Now you might say, what is there on the wall of the class, my dear students? Yeah, not the walls, but the material on the wall. That could be what, my dear students? That could be the posters on the wall. Yes, the pictures on the wall, right? Maps on the wall, in fact. So these are things, and that of course, material on the wall, we call them that is peripheral learning. And once the more material is on the wall, the more charts are on the wall, more posters on the wall, more pamphlets on the wall, on the walls of the class, so definitely students would be learning more, in fact. So pace of learning would definitely be more, and that learning would definitely be, if you see, that learning would be in a very of course, there won't be any pressure in that learning. That learning would be useful learning. Why useful? Because every day the student come and they have a look on those charts and they learn, right? And again, what happens is that maybe after a week, the teacher, in fact, replaces those the charts or the posters with the new one. So again, the learning starts. So this activity goes on in the class. So that is what mean the characteristics of teaching learning process. And again, we saw that there are identities. The teacher students are given identities and their professions. So dear students, again, what happens? Of course, what is the student-teacher interaction? We see the teacher initiates with the whole group of students and with individuals right from the beginning. So there is interaction, of course. Teacher interacts, students interaction, yes, interact with each other from the beginning in various. So of course, we see that also we found in the class proceeding that, well, teacher interacts with a group of people, and he also interacts with the whole class right from the beginning, and so do the students. So true interaction, if you compare, definitely of course students interact with one another, and student interaction could be more, but there is a person of course who monitor all these things. And then feeling of the student, yes, in this method ideal attention is given to the students' feelings in this method, and if students are asked of course and relax, and you see this is again a very important point in this method, that if students are relaxed and confident, they would learn more. In fact, a relaxed mind, in fact, they definitely his intake would be more than a stressed mind, in fact a pressurized mind. So that's why of course if the student feel that well they are tired, so teacher takes a pause, in fact. So he teaches in fact what, in that if the student feel that they are tired, he asks them to visualize, in fact close your eyes. See, so that's why the point is that the students' feelings are definitely dealt with positively, and whenever they have any problem, then any reservations, so the teacher takes care of all those things. And again the next is of course that language is the first of two planned processes of communication. Functions has priority over form. In fact, what is the function of language? The communication of course has priority over form, and we had a discussion last week that well language has two purposes, the form of a language and of course the function of the language. And you see for the communication, the form, in fact of course in this method, form in fact dominates over the function in fact dominates over the form, or in other words you can say that the function has more value, function is given more weightage over the form, in fact. So students, which areas of language are in fact emphasized? So vocabulary is emphasized, right? And then of course speaking communicatively is emphasized, this matter through different activities. We saw that well vocabulary is given the weightage, and also what speaking communicatively, and student also read target language and also write. Fine. What is the role of students' native language in this method? So my dear students, yes, so what is that? Used to make the meanings of the dialogue clear. Of course, whenever there is a confusion, so the student native language could be used to make some important points clear. How evaluation is done? Yes, it is conducted on students' normal in-class performance, not through there is no formal test in this the method. Only the way student progress in the class, the way student respond in the class, so that is what the evaluation. Otherwise there is no formal testing system after this the method. And then of course errors are there, you see, and initially errors are ignored, and at the end of course the teacher, what he does, that he corrects the error of the students. So these are the in fact students, there are 10 the questions that of course we had to ask after every method, and then what we do, we have to answer them, of course. And my dear students, now we have talked about many methods so far. We talked about grammar translation method, we talked about direct method, we talked about audiolingual method, we talked about silent way, we talked about Suggestopedia, right? So these are the methods of course mean that we have talked about so far, and you see at the end of every method of course but we need to answer these 10 questions, and we call them TIQ, mean 10 important questions, and these questions should be on your fingertips. Remember that. So please know these questions and then try to attempt these questions well. Fine. Once you know these questions, then you would be able to understand the method well. You would know what are the goals of the teacher using grammar translation method, what are the goals of a teacher using direct method, what are the goals of a teacher using audiolingual method, what are the goals of a teacher using Suggestopedia, the goals of a teacher using silent way, so, and the goals of a teacher using CLL. So again, this is the first question. So if you consider all the methods mean the one, then what is the role? Then you will be able to know all these things, and of course finally once you would make your lesson plan in the next semester, so things would help you in fact. So therefore I want you students to know these 10 questions, and see at the end of every method, try to answer. And of course the textbook also, that covers these 10 questions, and of course what is the answer are also given. You may disagree and agree with the question. Again, I would say the methods that we have talked about, or we will talk about in the course. Yeah, what you can do, of course, I don't say that you need to replace your teaching methodology with the new one, but what you can do is that you need to think that if you have to use Suggestopedia or you have to use direct method, what would you do, right? Which techniques would you incorporate in your teaching methodology, and how that, what happens with that methodology, and will that be successful or not? In fact, this is of course the purpose, but you should know these are the methods. They're all methods are there given by experts, fine, and of course people use those methods, and you see, and then of course they are successful as well. So come to point, students. You see, that is what today's lecture. You can have this image, of course. What does it show, my dear students? What is it? Can you see the culture, connection, comparison, communities, again communicate? See, what is it? Can you see a community here? All right, fine. So of course that means our method is, of course, today approach is CLL, right? So community language learning. What do you mean by community, students? You know that we all live in communities, right? We have social communities, in fact. Clear? So that's why, of course, when your learner make a community, right? So since, of course, students are there to learn a foreign language, so that's why they call it CLL, community language learning, where your student, what happens? They become a community, and that community learns a language, right? So that community, of course, when the teacher takes the learners as a community. So this is the approach that we use in the subject TEFL, that is community language learning. And this image, I believe, of course, it conveys the message to you. So again, now what is CLL, or community language learning, my dear students? So as what happens here, this teacher take students as whole persons, in fact, right? As one unit, as whole persons, fine? So now what do you mean by whole person, my dear students? So when you consider students as whole person, then you cater their feelings, right? Their intellect, their physical reaction, their instinctive protective reactions, plus their desire to learn. So this is what mean that you being instructor, you being TEFL student, what you do, that in the CLL view, of course, we take student as whole persons, mean whole, complete whole persons. So whole person mean that when feelings of the students, then how students feel. For example, when adult learners come in a second language class, so what are their feelings, for example? So if the class is mixed, for example, you are in the co-ed system of education, so what are the feelings of the students in the co-ed system? What are the feelings of your students in the second learning when they are, of course, in the middle age, right? So that, of course, the feelings. And then, the point is that what do they expect, and what are the feelings for the teachers and for the administration? And then what is their intellect level, in fact, where do they stand, right? Of course, when you talk about intellect level, definitely you will see that their learning pace also. Definitely a young learner, his learning pace would be better than an adult and an old learner. Of course, if your student is about 50 or 60, and you know that aging itself is a disease. So with aging, what happens, that you see that the pace of learning decreases. So is the case that, of course, intellect level of the student, when you are dealing with students of grade 10 or 9, so their intellect level, their pace of learning, with those who are, for example, about 50 or of course 60 years of age, some learners definitely they come for this purpose. So they mean intellect level, they of course their intellectual, you have to keep in mind their cognitive level as well. And their physical reactions also, as a whole person, you see that how they react physically, in fact. Fine, their physical reaction, of course, these reactions with the student, in fact, and how they interact with the teacher, how they come forward, how they shake hand, and then also their instinctive protective reaction. In fact, I mean, instinct is something inside, that is jibillat, of course, that instinctively do something, of course. So this is another, that when you are a teacher, so you take student as a whole body. So in whole body, your instinctive protective reactions are also there, and also their desire to learn, right? So their commitment for the learning, that definitely, if somebody's career is at stake, so his desire to learn language would be much more than of course a person who is just doing it for just, to kill his time. I gave you an example here, of course. A Korean engineer has to, of course, got an opportunity in Korea, but the problem was that he was not a good speaker of English. So that assignment was linked with his communication skills, and the guy was given only 3 months, that if he improves his language skills in 3 months, he would get that assignment. That was international assignment. That was very well paid assignment. But the point was, the barrier was that his poor English language skills. So that was his desire, of course. And then once he saw the opportunities, it was a very good opportunity. So that engineer, I tell you, of course, worked for 3 months continuously. He worked day in and day out, and he in fact did everything whatever he could do to learn English, of course. And then what he did, that he listened a lot, and he tried to practice a lot, and of course, and he spoke a lot, of course, and he spoke with his kids, with his spouse, and of course, even he used to in fact talk to himself, and he used to speak in an empty room. So these 3 months that he in fact burned the midnight oil. He worked really hard. So at the end of the 3 months, once the company interviewed him, and that guy was selected on merit, that the guy has improved his communication skills, English language skills, now he deserved to go on that mission. So this is what I am saying, that desire to learn is important. For example, of course, if you have a job opportunity and you have to go somewhere, and the point is that, of course, only this language skills, so then your desire should definitely be more, because you see an opportunity and you feel that if I improve this skill, I can grab the opportunity. So that's why desire to learn is more. Again, for example, even you might have seen some students having done their masters in English, but they are not good communicators. They cannot speak that language. Of course, there are so many, of course. It's not a new thing that there are so many people. I have seen some people that doing language course after completing the masters from the universities. So yes, it is there, right? Why? Because over there the focus is only on reading and writing, and there is no focus on what communication skills, the RSC skills. Fine. So that's why people are weak, they cannot communicate that. So that's why, of course, when you in community language learning, when you take students as a whole body, so you keep all these factors in mind. You keep in mind their feelings, you keep in mind their intellect, and all that. I hope it's enough on this slide. So we move on, students. Well, here is another image that you can see that whole person concept is shown through an image. This image, of course, in the slide, it shows what? That community language learning, CLL, advises teachers to take the student as a whole person, as a whole body, in fact. And then what is it? Here mean a group of ideas. This is what image you can have a look at. Now, of course, what we see that students are whole persons, right? So Larson also talks about that idea. Let's see how. What does it mean that students are whole person? So teacher must consider students as whole person. I mean, they have intellect, they have feelings, physical reactions, instant protective reactions, and desire to learn, in fact. Again, there's an image that you can see there is community is built, in fact. So there is community of students is there. So dear students, CLL again. Now here is very important point, that counseling, of course, that if you go back for a while, that student, of course, that maybe the word is new for you, that the counseling, for example, that CLL and counseling learning, in fact, and community language learning, your question might be that who gave this idea, who is the originator of this CLL? So dear student, of course, this theory is based on Charles A. Curran's, And Charles A. Curran, of course, his theory was counseling learning, in fact. Right? I repeat for you that Charles A. He's a psychologist. So his theory was based on that. His theory was counseling the learning, that is community language learning. So is in fact based on this counseling learning. You can see that arrow on the slide shows that this theory, of course, is based on counseling learning, and the counseling learning theory was given by Charles A. Curran. So, and of course, and his theory, of course, is based on adult learning. So that's why I mean for adults, that theory, of course, the Charles A. Curran's theory was the counseling learning was for adults. So move on, students. What is it? That adults, since we have just discussed that this community language learning theory is based on Charles A. Curran's counseling learning, and that counseling learning was in fact for the adults. In fact, Charles A. Curran gave that theory for adult learning or adult counseling. So here I mean why? Because adults feel frightened in a new learning situation, and it is quite natural, of course, with the passage of time. You see, once you feel that you feel that, of course, it's difficult to learn language because of the aging, because of the so many the factors. And again, maybe there is a pressure, of course, in the class. If students sometime in fact do well in the language learning, and some adults cannot do that, so they have the fear, of course. They feel frightened in a new learning situation. Inherent change and chances of making mistakes frighten them. So this is what, there can be many factors that then of course that is inside them, or what that they feel that they will make mistakes. So these things frighten them. So the teacher should be a counselor, in fact. So this is one, the point is that this CLL, this community language learning treats, I mean here the teacher becomes a counselor. He gives counseling, in fact, and his counseling again, of course, for the learners, you see, and the learners who have the fear, right, the fear of making mistakes, right, or who are the frightened, they are hesitant or they are reluctant. So the teacher is there to give them counseling or to counsel them, in fact. So teacher as a language counselor. I mean, who is a counselor, by the way? Counsel, you know, when counselor, students, counsel, of course, is a skilled, right, who is someone who is skilled to understand struggles students face as they try to internalize another language. This is important, of course, that, and I mean how, I told you that, well, how, I mean, this is what that the grammar one is, that we try to internalize the language. And how do we internalize? In fact, by of course by having, I mean, the native speakers, of course, knowledge of language. So even the counselor is a person who is skilled, who has this capability to understand what should he understand? Struggles, right, students face as they try to grab a concept or try to internalize another language. So that is, of course, the role of the counselor. And now again, it's I mean questionable, it's debatable that how can he do that, of course, that how a teacher can have that the capability. Maybe his experience can help him, in fact, so that he would know that, of course, if the learner has this kind of the problems, and why these problems are there, in fact, and why the learner struggles here, right? And of course, I mean, is it of course, does the learner struggle because of the language one interference, or some other psychological factors are there? So the teacher, he in fact works as a language counselor. He's a counselor on language, in fact. So dear students, we move on, right? This CLL is an humanistic approach taken from Carl Rogers' approach, 1950, in fact. Now Carl Rogers, again, he's a psychologist, student. So he, in fact, the focus of this theory is on affective emotional domain, right? So it is client-centered approach. So again, it's a very important concept that this CLL talks about. That CLL approach is, I mean, this CLL is a humanistic approach taken from, again, Carl Rogers' approach. And the Carl Rogers' approach was, that theory was on that focus on affective, right? Both emotional domain and it is client-centered. I mean, the point is that of course you are the language, the teacher, you are the language instructor. So your approach should be client-centered, your approach should be student-centered, right? And again, that we talk about in this silent way that, well, the teaching is subordinated to what? Learning, in fact. That of course the learner is important, and of course the teacher should go on with the pace of the pace of the learner. So here what the approach is, the client-centered approach. Here why we say the client-centered approach, because I mean if the teacher of course is successful, and the client of course, his client students would come, and if he is not successful, the next day that he might not find that student there. So those students, I mean, they are the clients of course, and if they only come if they find something useful in the class, otherwise they stop coming. So that's why of course this CLL approach, I told you, is based on Carl-Rogers, and Carl-Rogers theory based on what? On client-centered approach, mean that we need to know the needs of our students, need of the clients, and then accordingly we should manage. Accordingly we should in fact facilitate the learners. So our clients are what? The students, being the TEFL teachers, my dear students. Our clients are what? Our TEFL, our English language students, or of course foreign language learning students. So if we in fact help them out, if you facilitate them, right, if they feel that they are learning something, so they would be there. Otherwise you might not find them in the next class, right? So that's why this approach should be client-centered approach, where the client, the student should be given due value, in fact. Yes, students, any problem? Is it difficult? No, it's simple, in fact, because name itself is very simple, that community language learning. Yes, CLL. Yes, students, fine? All right. Well, students, so it's a very important concept, this client-centered approach, that how we can in fact how we can play with the emotions of students, how can we help our students, and how being a counselor, how being a teacher in fact, and how being the counselor, we can cater to the needs of our client. So the different ways are there when the students come to you, and if you feel that you are really giving them something and they are learning that foreign language, so you are successful. And again, definitely of course, doesn't mean that you spoon feed the student, of course. I mean, knowing the psychology of the student, knowing that what do they need, and how their requirements, how their in fact needs can be fulfilled. So teacher needs to be, I mean, professional. He needs to give something that student want, and for that of course the teacher should be a good counselor. So dear students, if we move on, that what are the factors of affective, and this word is affective domain, right? Affection, you know word affection, right? Affective, what are the factors of affective domain? So here mean the same factors are given. Empathy. Now what is empathy, by the way, students? Empathize. So again, that, well, definitely, you know, I mean, if you talk about our affective domain, so we have both the negative features and of course our positive features. So in our upper story, of course, we have this left auricle, we have right auricle. If you talk about the brain of right, so what does that mean? This is the right side, in fact the right part of the brain controls our this left side, and the left auricle of course controls our right side. It means this side is more important, right? This is diagonal, of course, is there. That left part of the brain controls the right part, and you know that our right side is of course more stronger than our left side. But and which side is controlled by this I mean right side? So left side of the brain, of course, and controls our right side. So and then the right side controls our left side. So it is said that of course left side of the brain, of course, it has, I mean, a lot of skills are there. On this side you have just, I mean, you may have creative ideas, you may have music and all that. So the point is, what are the factors of affective domain that we see here? That empathy is one of the factors, that you empathize, and we are of course our learners of our what amalgamation of the good points and the bad points. But being the TEFL instructor, we have to, if you see the previous slide, that of course, what is it? That we have to focus on affective domain. Now, what is affective domain? That we see that, of course, the positive features of the domain and also the negative features of the domain. That empathize, of course, mean that you see you have to empathize with the students. And what is empathy? In fact, that again, the empathy mean that putting yourself in the audience place, putting yourself in the audience shoes. But in our case, of course, but we see that we have to put the TEFL, of course, mean the TEFL instructor, we have to put ourselves in the audience place and feel how my learner feels now, right? What are his feelings now, right? And what does he need now, in fact, right? So this is what empathy. If the learner is shy, so how can I overcome his shyness? If the learner tries to dominate the class, and how can I handle the situation? So again, right, empathy is there. Also self-esteem, right? Definitely, of course, the learner comes in the class, so he has a self-esteem, and particularly here, because we see that the theory is based on of counseling the learning, and that theory was for the adult, of course, the learners. So again, the self-esteem is very important of the learner. So we need not to hurt, right, the students or the learners of foreign language, because if self-esteem is hurt, definitely, the process of the learning would not be useful. Attitude, extroversion, in fact, right? One is that introversion, of course, that you have in psychology we have term that introvert, and of course extrovert mean the people who are social, in fact. Here is attitude extrovert, of course, right? That how, if your learner has introvert, right, and then how to handle this situation, and if the learner is extrovert, and how to handle this attitude, how to manage an extrovert attitude, of course, in the students, and if they are introverts, and how to manage it. And mind you, of course, definitely, we being TEFL instructors, we try to have that win-win situation, in fact, right? So without hurting the feeling of the students, without in fact passing on any statement that may hurt him, we have to proceed this process of the language learning, in fact. And again, some imitation is there, inhibition is some learner, they inhibit, in fact, right? They have inhibitions also, and then some learners imitate also. Yes, imitation is there. Anxiety, some learners have anxiety, and these are what, of course, we have this. We are amalgamation of these factors. These you can say affective domain, that there are positive sides and also there are negative sides. So there is anxiety and so on. So definitely, the point is, we are taking your learners as a whole, the body. So we have to focus on this affective domain of the learner, and definitely our approach should be what? Client-centered approach. That we need our level best to keep the client in mind, and to in fact to help the learner, right, as per his demands, as per his requirements. And in this way, of course, the learner would be confident to learn the language. And like you see in the class proceeding, my dear student, that you have read this, what happens in the class, of course, the class is in Indonesia class is there, and you see, of course, that the teacher enters the class, and what happens, for example, that of course, and he gives instruction in my mother tongue, right? What happens? So instructions are given in my mother tongue, and then the teacher, of course, gives some directions, and then teacher asks that, of course, students will record the voices, and we will do activities later on. And in this way, of course, what the teacher he does, he just helps them out. So he goes to the first student, and the first student stands up. Of course, she's a girl, she raises her hand, and then, of course, she takes time, right, in uttering just good evening, of course, or she just utters evening. Then in that utterance, she even tries 4 or 5 times, and the teacher, in fact, kept on encouraging her, in fact. So the teachers, of course, is there. Teacher, he withdraws, but he keeps on, in fact, helping the students. Then, of course, the students move on, and then finally another student in fact gives the full greeting, of course. So this is what means that you have, your approach should be client-centered approach, and your focus should be on affective, in fact, domain. And these domain mean that you have to empathize with the learner, and you have to care for self-esteem of the learner. That of course when the learner in fact tries something, so you have to help him out. So dear students, these are some factors of affective domain. Now, learning process is not just that sender and receive. Sender sends the message and the receiver receives and he gives feedback. No, it is interactional. In fact, it is what? Interaction. There are interaction. It is transactional also, right? And communicative. It is a social process, in fact. So here mean what? That what is communication, my dear students? Communication is the process of sharing by which messages produce response. Who gave this definition? Yeah, definition is given by Mary Munter, a famous business communicator. So my dear students, of course, that the communication is a process, but that is process of sharing, which brings what? Response. Again, that communication is a process. So this, what makes this process, right? So this process, in fact, what we need a communicator, we need a receiver, and of course then the communicator sends a message, and he sends a message through a channel, and the receiver receives the message, and finally he gives the feedback. And this all take place in a particular situation, of course. So that is, of course, we call it, right, social environmental theory, in fact. And again we also call it rhetorical theory. That theory talks about what is rhetoric, by the way? Do you know? Rhetoric is the art of good communication, art of good speaking, or also of good writing. Fine? That is, rhetoric is R-H-E-T-O-R-I-C. Rhetoric, R-H-E-T-O-R-I-C. So rhetoric is what? Is a branch of linguistics that teaches us art of good communication. This can be your oral communication, this can be written communication. So here, language is not that, of course, in language that you just send a message and the receiver receives and of course gives the feedback. So it is what? It is interactional, of course. It is communicative. It is a social process. You communicate always in a particular situation, of course, and that's why, of course, when a speaker speaks, so that definitely he speaks in a particular environment, particular domain, and the receivers also receives his message and he replies in a course particular way. So that's why the theory is rhetorical, the theory that talks about that of course communication is done in a specific situation. So that is what, see, okay, now students, here mean that we talked about earlier that the CLL is an approach, and what makes this approach? Cognitive plus affective factors, right? Here mean now cognitive factors are given in this image, you can have a look. And then affective factors are also given. That here the classroom interaction is between peers. Again, what? Symmetrical, right? So this symmetrical communication, and then asymmetrical communication, mind you. So symmetrical mean the people who are at the same level. You can call them the peer-to-peer communication. All are learners, right? And they communicate with one another, and we call it what? Symmetrical communication, the peer-to-peer communication. And second, of course, is the learner and knower asymmetrical. Why? Here in the second situation, we see that the one person knows more than the other. One is learner, a student, and second is the knower, for example, the teacher. So if you see in this, the CLL, of course, the approach, that, well, there is what cognition mean, your mind, whatever goes on in your upper story, plus mean affective factors, right? Affective factors we have just talked about. We talked about what? Self-esteem is there, and we talk about other factors. See, you can have a look. So the classroom interaction is what? Is between peers, that's symmetrical or at the same level, and then what? Asymmetrical mean one person knows more than the other does. So here you can see, have a look, of course, in the image, that what is cognitive domain and what are affective domain. In cognitive domain, what? There is synthesis, there is recollection, there is comprehension, and there is evaluation, there is analysis, in fact. These come, of course, mean what? What is there in cognition mean? Mind, of course. Cognition is there. So what is the cognition domain? Right? what? Synthesis. You synthesize things, in fact, right? Synthesis is there, and then what else? Your recollection. You can recollect things, you think, in fact. And again, there is comprehension, understanding, and also evaluation, right? You, of course, there are tests, evaluation there, and also there is analysis, right? So this is what mean, these are what mean, you can say that cognitive domain, factors of cognitive domain. Which factors, students? Synthesis. You synthesize things, you combine things, in fact. Fine. And then also mean, what do we have? Recollection. You recollect your past memories, you start thinking, and then you try to comprehend. Now, what is comprehension? Of course, comprehension is one of the step of reading process. What makes reading process? Right? Recognition, association, and comprehension. So also this comes in your cognitive factor, that is what? Comprehension, and also evaluation. You evaluate people, right? And then on the other side, we have affective domain. What is it? I mean, you have values, you have motivation, you have attitudes, you have stereotypes, feelings, in fact. So all these are what? I mean, they are factors of affective domain and factors of cognitive domain. Yes, students? Any question? Any problem? No? Not clear about symmetric and asymmetric relations? Okay. Good question. Well, so in symmetry mean, of course, we see that there should be symmetry in the class, right? So that even, see, the symmetry means symmetrical communication is there, symmetrical interaction is between the people who are at the same level. For example, you are sitting in the class, right? And then you too, for example, you all students are sitting and you all are pursuing your third semesters of Master in English. So at the present, you are all peers. So your communication would be symmetrical communication, right? You are at the same level, right? And then when the teacher would talk to you, and definitely the teacher knows more than you do. So in that situation, that would be asymmetrical interaction, because in asymmetrical relation, what happens? The teacher, in fact, he's expert, he knows more than the others do, in fact. So it can be in any situation, for example, right? So it can be in a class, for example, if a student is the topper of the class, definitely, of course, when he talks to others, so that can again be asymmetrical, because he has done a lot of work and he knows more than others do. So that is what mean asymmetrical interaction. Yes, clear? Anything else? Fine. Move on, students. So in the way, in fact, the point is this community language learning, my dear students, yes, is an approach, of course. And here what happens, that the role of the teacher, he becomes what? Counselor, in fact. And then another is that the teacher, what? Of course, he withdraws, right? Teacher just facilitates the learner, in fact. He helps the students in the best possible way. Wherever he feels that the students struggle, so he comes forward, in fact. And even how does he help students? He helps the students in chunks, for example, right? He said, for example, first if, then evening, and then of course means it's a good evening. So he goes with the student and he's standing at the back of the student, in fact. Like we see that the teacher says that I'm at your back, and whenever you have any problem, so the student gives what the student, give this sentence in their mother tongue, and the teacher translates that, in fact, that expression in English, and this way the activities, in fact, the move on, in fact. So dear students, what that this talking about the community language, the learning, where teacher is a counselor. He gives counseling to the students, in fact, and he helps them, of course, in the best possible way. Alright, students. So another important thing that we see in the class, that the teacher, in fact, gives examples to the students, in fact. So to different examples, he tries his level best to convey that the sense, of course, to have that sentence, of course, recorded in that tape recorder. So this is what the activities, of course, will take place in this community language learning. So dear students, towards the end, of course, if you want a summary of this session, if I ask you to give me a summary of this, can you try? No, it's difficult for you. Difficult for you. Okay, let me try. In fact, of course, I'll give you a summary of this the method. So dear student, this is another method of foreign language teaching, and the method is what we call it community language learning, right? So what happens in this method, that you see the method is, of course, based on a theory given by Charles A. Curran, and the theory of Charles A. Curran is what? Learning, right? What is that? Of course, see, adult learning, in fact. So that was the theory, in fact, given by Charles A. Curran, and this community language learning is based on that the theory. So what happens in this theory, of course, that well, we take students as a whole body, and once we take students as a whole body, then we keep in mind their of course their intellect level, their feelings, right? And then accordingly, of course, we help them out. And again, the point is that the client-centered approach is used in this the method. And what is client-centered approach, students? In this approach, simply what happens is that, you see, what we do, that we keep our students in mind, and whenever we feel that the student struggles, so the teacher comes forward and he helps him out. And that's what the approach is. What approach is? Audience-centered approach. Approach is client-centered approach. So when you keep this approach in mind, yes, we have to cater to the needs, right? Again, when you say this client-centered approach, then we have to keep in mind the background of the client, his cultural background, his of course, understanding level, educational background, social background, and all that. Only then you can have this client-centered approach, or the audience-centered approach, or in other words, what? Student-centered approach. And this is really important approach, that once you cater to the needs, and you cannot cater to the needs of the and we cannot do that unless we know, unless we have understanding of our audience, of our client, that what does he want, in fact, right? In which areas he in fact struggles, or which areas he is good at, and accordingly, in fact, we can of course design activities for our our students. And again, we saw that, well, affective domain, of course, of the student is also is considered, where we see, in fact, the cognitive domain, in fact, and also which other domain? Yes, cognitive domain. We have to keep in mind that, see, what is the synthesis level of the students, comprehension level of the student, in fact, understanding level of the students, right? And then accordingly, of course, this the teaching can be done. So the process and this approach, that is community language learning, in fact, is really useful for adult learners, right? Because adult learners have the problem. In fact, they have the fear. Of course, they sometimes they feel frightened, right, to make a mistake, and sometimes they don't say anything, right? They shy, in fact, in the class. So this approach, because we empathize with our learners, right? So we keep their feelings in mind, we put ourselves in their places, because approach is the audience-centered approach. So the learners, of course, if they are adult learners, so they find it easy to move on with other students as well. So that's why this community language learning approach, in fact, is really a method that can be used for the teaching of foreign language. The point is that what are its principles, what are its techniques, right? What happens is a lot of details are required. In the coming lecture, we will see what are the principles, fine, and we need, in fact, a lecture or two on it, because the method deals with the principles. Of course, a lot of discussion is there. A lot of discussion is required on the principles, and also we will review all the 10 questions, that how this method, in fact, caters to the needs of the students. What is the role of the students' native language, and what are the goals of the teacher using the CLL? What is the role of the student, and all that? So these things we will see once we will talk about. We will have a discussion on the principles of this approach, and then we will see what are the techniques used by the teacher in the class. And then again, at the end, we will ask you the question that can you use this approach or not. So this is what we have to see in the next lecture, where we'll have a detailed discussion on it. So still I want you to read the principles and see that the techniques, right? And you know that principles are what is invisible thought. For every principle, for every technique, there is a principle behind. And once you read observations, and then you might be able to see that of course this is observation and this is the principle, and why those drills are used by the instructor. And of course for every drill, what is the principle behind. So these things we will do in the next class. Again, I told you in the last lecture, dear students, that reading before the lecture is important. Right, one reading or two readings before the lecture really in fact pose some the questions, and once you listen to the lecture, those questions can be answered. And then again after the lecture, give 2 or 3 readings and things would be easy for you. Yes, you might find the book is very easy. In fact, don't think that it's a difficult, the text is difficult or all that. Text is very simple. What you need to do is that try to read, right? And of course the text proceeds in a very smooth manner. Almost every method has a sequence, as that first of all a brief intro to the method is given. That for example in this method we are talking about the CLL. A brief introduction is given on the first page of your book that says that what is this CLL in fact, right? How can we define this community language learning, and then who gave this method, fine. And then of course the writer moves on and he takes you to a class where the actual class takes place. In fact, this is just an example, of course, so you can have an idea of course of that method, that in particularly of that particular method, that what are the activities in the class and what see. So then once you read that experience, you come to know a lot of things. And then of course mean that principles are discussed of those methods from observations. Definitely, you see, you have the principles, there is a list of observations, and then the principles are there. So again, once you read the principles, of course, then you can see that which techniques can be used in the class. So then at the end what happens, that the review of the principles is done. Well students, so this is what that's all we have to cover in this lecture number 13. So in next lecture, which is important as far as this method is concerned, CLL. So now we have to increase our pace, we have to move a bit faster, but for that you have to do go an extra mile. You have to read in fact before the lecture, so that once we in fact if you read before the lecture, so things would be more clear for you. And mind you, these methods that we are doing, of course, just for your understanding, that you should be able to know in fact an understanding of the methods. Fine, once you have understanding of these methods, definitely you will be able to take some techniques from these methods to improve the methodology that you are using. And if you are in fact if you want to make your career particularly in this TEFL, so then these methods would definitely help you in your teaching of foreign language. So but for that, again, I would say that yes, understanding of these methods is a must. You should know, of course, that what are these different methods are there, and what are their techniques, in fact, what are the goals of the teachers who use these methods, and what is the role of the teacher also, and what are the characteristics of teaching learning process, and how language is viewed, and which areas of language, of course, are focused, which skills are highlighted, and what is the role of the mother tongue of course of the learner in that method. So again, these methods definitely would open our vision, right, and gives these methods give us confidence, right, so that we can be successful TEFL instructors. So definitely in the next semester, once you will have micro teaching and lesson plans, these methods, of course, of foreign language teaching would definitely help you. And maybe in future, if you want to do research on any of the methods, so you can take it as a model, in fact. So with this, to students, I say goodbye to all of you from this lecture. So we will see, inshallah, in the next lecture. We will talk about community language learning, and we will see principle of that. Till then, it's goodbye. Take care. Allah Hafiz. I thank you all.